Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into the Israelites' time in Egypt.
A period just full of paradoxes and
It
intrigue,
really is. We're talking about people whose population just boomed, even though they were facing oppression.
all while they were living in a culture that was vastly different from their own.
Yeah, so how did they navigate this clash of civilizations? How did their faith survive in the midst of such a dominant and contrasting culture?
It's a question that has fascinated scholars for centuries.
It has, and we're going to try to find out.
Yeah, on the surface, it might seem like a pretty simple story, a group of people just migrating to a new land.
Right.
But when you start to look deeper, you encounter, just this complex interplay of social dynamics, religious beliefs, and struggles for power.
Absolutely. Let's start with that paradox. You mentioned population growth under oppression.
Yeah,
Seems counterintuitive.
it does.
You would think that hardship would lead to decline, not a boom.
That's what makes it so interesting. Exodus 1 paints a very vivid picture of this growth, and they use words like fruitful, increased greatly, and even the land was filled with them. But why? Was it just a testament to their faith, like some interpretations suggest? Or were there other factors at play?
I'm curious about those other factors. What else could contributed to such remarkable growth?
Well, some scholars suggest that the Israelites might have actually benefited, at least initially, from the, relative stability and agricultural abundance of the Nile Delta region.
Oh, okay.
Remember, they were skilled pastoralists, and Egypt was known for its fertile land.
Right.
This could have created conditions that were actually favorable for population increase.
So a combination of environmental factors and their own agricultural expertise,
Hmm.
that makes sense, but we can't ignore the role of faith.
Absolutely. Their belief in a God who had promised to bless their descendants undoubtedly fueled their resilience and hope. Even when they were going through difficult times, their faith was a source of strength and identity that helped them to persevere.
But that faith was constantly being challenged by the dominant Egyptian culture, a culture that was just steeped in polytheism and had a completely different worldview.
Right.
How did they navigate that clash?
That's a crucial question. The Egyptian pantheon, with its huge number of gods and goddesses, was woven into, every aspect of their lives, from their social structures to their understanding of the cosmos.
Wow.
Just imagine being an Israelite surrounded by these elaborate rituals and offerings to animal-headed deities,
Yeah.
and then the belief that the Pharaoh himself was divine.
It must have felt like stepping into a completely different reality.
Oh yeah, it would have been like a whole other world.
How many gods are we even talking about here?
Well, some estimates say as many as 1,500 deities representing something like 65 to 85 distinct figures, and they weren't just, abstract concepts. They were intertwined with nature, often represented by animals or forces of nature, which really emphasized the idea that the divine was all around them.
Can you give us some specific examples?
Sure, take Ra, the sun god. Unlike the Israelites' eternal and unchanging god, Ra was believed to be born from another god. He was believed to age and even to experience fear.
He felt fear. What did a sun god have to be afraid of?
Well, there's a myth where Ra faces a serpent demon named Apep every single night, threatening to swallow the sun and plunge the world into darkness. This constant battle symbolized the struggle between order and chaos, light and darkness, which was central to the Egyptian worldview.
So even the most powerful god in their pantheon wasn't invincible? That's a stark contrast to the Israelite understanding of God. What about other Egyptian deities?
Well, you have Pa, who was believed to have spoken creation into being, but unlike the biblical account, he then went and created other gods with physical bodies. And then there's the concept of Nun, an eternal and infinite ocean existing before creation, which differs from the biblical narrative of a void.
So the Israelites found themselves immersed in a culture where the divine was everywhere, but it was a very different kind of divine than they believed in. It must have been a constant challenge to maintain their monotheistic faith amidst such a pervasive polytheistic culture. It makes you think about those everyday interactions, like how did an Israelite shepherd reconcile his beliefs with the Egyptian farmer next door who might leave offerings to a fertility god before planting his crops?
It's fascinating to consider, isn't it? That's where we have to start speculating, because the historical record doesn't really give us a detailed playbook for how these everyday encounters went. But I imagine the Israelites found ways to adapt and to live out their faith in subtle ways without, necessarily provoking direct confrontation.
So a quiet resistance, maybe. Maintaining their distinct identity without drawing too much attention or risking persecution.
Precisely. And we need to remember that this wasn't just some theological debate.
Right.
These different beliefs had real, tangible consequences. The Egyptians' worldview, with its emphasis on appeasing the gods, influenced their laws, their social hierarchy, even their understanding of justice.
Meaning the Israelites were living under a system that didn't really align with their own moral code, their
Mhm.
understanding of right and wrong, their concept of a just God.
Exactly, which makes their resilience even more remarkable.
It does.
And it's here when they're facing these challenges that the power of community really comes into focus. Remember, they migrated to Egypt as a family unit, and that strong sense of kinship probably played a crucial role in preserving their traditions and beliefs.
It's like a cultural anchor holding them steady in the middle of all this swirling current of foreign culture,
Yeah.
passing down stories, sharing rituals, reinforcing those core values that set them apart.
Yes, and those stories weren't just bedtime tales. They were narratives that carried serious theological weight. The stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, of God's covenant with their ancestors. These served as constant reminders of their unique identity and their special relationship with the divine.
It's amazing how powerful those narratives can be, especially for a people facing oppression. Connecting them to something much larger than themselves, reminding them that they were part of a story that transcended their present circumstances.
Oh.
But we'd be remiss if we didn't address the emotional toll, wouldn't we? To be constantly surrounded by a culture that sees your beliefs as, at best, misguided and at worst, heretical, that can't be easy.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the intellectual and theological debates, but we can't forget about the human element, to feel like an outsider, like a foreigner in the very place you call home. That breeds a sense of isolation, vulnerability, perhaps even fear.
Words like alienated, disrespected, maybe even threatened come to mind, knowing that your beliefs make you a target, that the very essence of who you are is viewed with suspicion by those in power.
And yet, in the midst of all this, the Israelites not only survived, but thrived.
Yeah.
Their population continued to grow, their cultural identity stayed intact. It speaks to an incredible resilience, a strength drawn from somewhere deep within.
It really does.
Yeah.
Which raises another interesting question. Were there any notable figures besides Joseph who embodied this resilience? Individuals whose stories might shed light on how they navigated this complex social and religious landscape. It's frustrating that the historical record is so sparse when it comes to those individual stories. I mean, we have glimpses of figures like Moses, of course, but his story comes later during the Exodus. What about the generations that came before? Those everyday Israelites who lived, loved, worshipped, and resisted in the shadow of the pharaohs.
It's a gap that historians and archaeologists are always trying to fill. We have little hints from archaeological finds, like remnants of Israelite settlements and artifacts that show their unique cultural practices.
Right.
But those individual stories, those whispers of faith and resistance, they're often lost to us.
Which makes it even more important to think about why this ancient story still matters today. What can we in the 21st century learn from the experience of the Israelites?
Well, it's fascinating that their challenges still resonate after all these years. The themes of cultural clash, religious persecution, the struggle to maintain your identity when you're faced with a dominant culture, these are universal experiences that have sadly been repeated throughout history and even in our own times.
So many groups have faced similar struggles. Forced assimilation prejudice, the pressure to conform or face the consequences.
Exactly. And the Israelite story gives us this powerful reminder that faith, community, and cultural memory can be really strong forces for resilience, even in the darkest of times.
They really can.
Their story is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to resist oppression and hold on to hope.
And it emphasizes the importance of understanding and appreciating the experiences of people who are different from us.
Yeah.
To recognize that our own beliefs and values aren't the only ones, and that diversity, both cultural and religious, makes our world a richer place.
Absolutely. The Israelites' time in Egypt challenges us to think about how we treat those who are different, those whose beliefs might challenge our own. Are we, as individuals and as a society, making space for those who don't fit the mold? Are we encouraging understanding and empathy, or are we just continuing systems of exclusion and prejudice?
Those are tough questions, but they're important ones. And maybe the biggest lesson we can take from this deep dive is that history isn't just a bunch of facts and dates. It's more like a tapestry woven with the threads of human experience, joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy, faith and doubt, all mixed together. And within those threads, we find stories that echo across time, giving us insights that can guide us, challenge us, and help us to better understand ourselves and the world we live in.
Beautifully put. And as we finish up this exploration of the Israelites in Egypt, we'll leave you with this final thought. Imagine yourself standing on the banks of the Nile, the busy world of ancient Egypt all around you. Can you hear the echoes of their story? Can you feel the weight of their struggles, the strength of their resilience? And most importantly, what lessons will you take with you as you step back into your own world?
And don't forget this period of oppression, this clash of cultures. It all leads up to one of the most dramatic events in history. The Exodus. Join us next time as we dig into the story of Moses and the Israelites' incredible escape from Egypt. Until then, keep searching, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.